I woke up one morning to the sound of birds, grabbed my coffee and stepped outside to enjoy the sunrise like I always do, but something felt off. My front yard looked like it had just survived a tropical storm. The ground was soaked, puddles glistened in the early light, the grass was squishy underfoot like it had been watered for hours. I hadn't touched the hose in days. I live alone, no kids, no roommates, no secretive garden gnomes sneaking midnight showers, just me, my coffee, and apparently a yard that waters itself. At first I thought maybe the old faucet was leaking, or maybe the timer on some long-forgotten sprinkler system had glitched. Then I remembered I don't even have sprinklers. Just one hose neatly coiled beside the house, which felt strangely warm to the touch, as if someone had recently used it. That's when I checked the water bill and nearly dropped my mug. The usage had spiked. Not just a little either. It looked like I'd been running a water park in my backyard. Something was wrong. I started watching for patterns. Every day I'd come home to find the hose slightly moved, the nozzle dripping. One day I even noticed small, muddy footprints leading across my lawn and back again. So I asked around. My neighbors were friendly and helpful except one. Her name was Karen. No, seriously, Karen. She had moved in 2 months ago and immediately crowned herself queen of the cul-de-sac. She wasn't on the HOA board, but you wouldn't know it from her behavior. Clipboard in hand, she walked the neighborhood daily like she was doing an inspection tour for Better Homes and Gardens. She had already filed complaints about someone's grass being too long and told a delivery guy that his van disturbed the aesthetic harmony of the street. But water theft? That felt low even for her. I had no proof, not yet, but that changed one Saturday when I came back from the grocery store. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw her, floral blouse, oversized sun hat, dragging my hose across my yard like it belonged to her. She didn't even flinch when she saw me, just smiled, waved like we were best friends, and said, "Hope you don't mind." Just a quick rinse. I sat in my car, stunned, coffee now cold, watching her connect my hose to a pressure washer and begin spraying down her front porch with the confidence of someone who pays the water bill. Except she didn't. I did. That was the moment the game changed. I didn't say anything that first time. I just sat in my car, staring, stunned that someone could be that bold, that entitled. But the more I thought about it, the more it boiled my blood. So later that afternoon, I walked over and knocked on her door. I kept it polite, asked if maybe she was having issues with her water supply. She laughed, like I'd just told her the funniest joke of the year, and said, "Oh no, your hose just has better pressure. I figure we're all neighbors, right? Community property and all." Community property, like my water bill was part of a neighborhood GoFundMe. I told her gently but firmly that I wasn't comfortable with her using my hose without asking. She smiled, tilted her head like she was talking to a toddler, and said, "Well, I'm sure the HOA won't mind. We're all supposed to share and be friendly." Then she closed the door. Conversation over. That was my first real glimpse of the wall I was up against. I'm not a confrontational person. I don't like drama, but I also don't like being walked on. So I went the official route. I took pictures, the hose trailing across my lawn, the water pooling on the sidewalk. I emailed the HOA, attached my bill, and asked if there was some obscure rule about shared utilities. A few days later, they responded with a sentence that made my blood run cold. "Thank you for your concern. At this time, we encourage all neighbors to resolve minor disputes amicably without HOA intervention." Translation, deal with it yourself. So I did. I bought a hose lock. Cheap, simple, problem solved, right? Wrong. The next morning, the lock was gone. Not picked, not unscrewed, cut clean through. Someone had used bolt cutters. I stood there, staring at the sliced metal like it was evidence from a crime scene. I already knew who had done it. Across the street, Karen was once again using my hose, this time to rinse down her SUV like she was filming a commercial. I walked over, asked her directly about the lock. She didn't even deny it, said that thing was a safety hazard. Someone could trip. I took care of it. Then she went back to scrubbing her tires like nothing had happened. I went back inside and just sat there, numb, the sound of rushing water echoing in my ears. She was using my water, my hose, on my property and acting like I was the one out of line. And the HOA wouldn't lift a finger. That's when I knew I needed proof, real proof. So I installed a camera, small, discreet, motion activated, I tucked it near the spigot hidden under the gutter. If I couldn't stop her, I'd at least document her. 2 days later, I had her, clear as day, Karen, creeping into my yard, dragging the hose like a cartoon villain, watering her plants, filling a kiddie pool, even washing her dog. It was a full-on production. I posted the video to a local neighborhood forum with the title, "Neighbor Steals My Water Every Morning." It exploded. Some people laughed. Others were outraged. One guy sent me a link to a motion-activated sprinkler that sprays trespassers. But best of all, Karen saw it. I know because the next morning she came to my door. No sun hat. No fake smile. Just rage. She accused me of violating her privacy, damaging her reputation, and creating a hostile environment. I told her she was violating my property, stealing my resources, and costing me money. That's when she leaned in and said, with pure venom, "Do something about it. I dare you." And that, right there, was the spark. The dare. The line in the sand. She had no idea what she'd just done. Because now, it wasn't just about water. It was about pride. It was about boundaries. And if she wanted to see what I'd do about it, well, she was about to find out. I spent the next 2 nights planning, not sleeping, not pacing, just planning. Karen had issued a dare, and I wasn't about to let it go unanswered. This wasn't about pettiness anymore. This was about justice. I had tried everything the nice way. I asked politely. I went through the HOA. I even locked my hose like some medieval peasant trying to protect their last loaf of bread. But she cut through that like it was a joke. So if she wanted to play dirty, fine. I would bring the mud. Literal mud. I took a day off work and spent it watching from behind the blinds. Around 10:30 a.m., right on schedule, I heard the spigot click and the hiss of water running. She was back at it, same smug expression, same yoga pants, same entitled strut. She dragged the hose across my yard like she was doing me a favor. I stepped outside, phone in hand, pretending to text. She saw me, smirked, didn't stop, didn't hesitate. She wanted me to know she wasn't afraid. That I couldn't stop her, that my warnings, my cameras, my complaints meant nothing. When she was done washing her driveway, she waved the hose at me and said, "See, works great. You should thank me for keeping it in shape." That was the moment I made up my mind. I was done reacting. It was time to act. That afternoon, I drove past a construction site on the edge of the neighborhood and saw it. A temporary sewage tank, not a small one, industrial size, the kind they use for portable toilets and waste storage. And suddenly the most awful, brilliant idea bloomed in my mind. I parked, walked over, struck up a casual conversation with one of the workers, told them I was a homeowner experimenting with an irrigation system and might need access to a tank like that for a night. He laughed, said as long as I didn't touch the pump or cause a mess, he didn't care. I slipped him a little cash and thanked him. At home, I pulled out my tools and built a custom adapter that connected my spigot to a second hose, one that ran behind the bushes and straight into the sewage tank. The outward setup looked completely normal. The hose lay coiled where it always was, but now it had a secret. When the spigot was turned on, the water would draw directly from the tank, not the house. I tested it once into a sealed bucket. The smell nearly knocked me out. I sealed everything up, buried the line, reset the camera, and went to bed with a twisted sense of anticipation bubbling under my skin. The trap was set. The next morning, right on cue, I heard the sound of the spigot again. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the live feed. There she was, Karen in her full glory, dragging the hose across my yard like it was her birthright. This time she had upgraded her operation. She attached one of those fancy oscillating sprinklers and placed it right in the center of her pristine front lawn. She turned a valve, and for a second, nothing happened. Then came the sputter, then the gurgle, then the geyser. A stream of thick, dark, putrid liquid exploded from the sprinkler and sprayed in a wide arc across her yard. It hit the grass, the patio, the porch, and then her white sneakers, her leggings, her oversized shirt all doused in what I can only describe as the wrath of the gods. She screamed, loud enough that people started poking their heads out of their doors. She slipped on the now swampy lawn, fell backward into her garden gnome display, and tried to crawl toward the spigot like a soldier in a battlefield. The sprinkler kept spinning, doing its unholy ballet, coating her lawn furniture and even her welcome mat. The camera captured every glorious second. The moment she pulled the hose loose, another stream hit her square in the back. It was chaos. Neighbors gasped. One man dropped his coffee. Another started recording, and I just stood inside watching it all unfold on the screen, sipping my coffee like a man enjoying fine art. This wasn't just revenge, this was performance. Later that day, Karen came stomping across the street, soaked, red-faced, yelling about lawsuits and biohazards and threats. I opened the door, calm as ever. She shouted that I had committed a crime, that she would make sure I paid. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "You told me to do something about it." So I did. She froze, fists clenched, shoes still squishing with every step. Then she turned and stormed back to her house without another word. I posted the video that night, not to the original forum, but to a wider audience. Within hours, it exploded. Millions of views, hundreds of comments. People called it poetic justice. The memes started immediately. Dramatic music, slow motion edits, captions like, "When you steal water and karma steals back." It became a sensation. And the best part, Karen, for once in her life, had nothing to say. She disappeared for 2 full days. Curtains drawn, car untouched. The queen of the HOA was in exile. But I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. People like her don't fade quietly. They regroup. They retaliate. And I was ready. I expected silence after the sewage storm, maybe even surrender. But Karen was never the type to go down without trying to drag everyone else with her. 2 days after the incident, a very official-looking envelope showed up in my mailbox. Inside was a letter typed in all caps, filled with legal buzzwords and dramatic accusations. She claimed I had committed biological assault, created a public health hazard, and emotionally traumatized both her and her dog. She even wrote that the stench had seeped into the foundation of her home, which made me wonder if she thought plumbing worked through osmosis. At first, I laughed. Then I didn't, because a day later, I received an actual fine from the $600 for violating community health protocols and fostering a hostile environment. I stared at the paper like it was a joke. I called the HOA office and spent half an hour being bounced between board members until one finally admitted that Karen had filed a formal complaint, backed by 2 witnesses who said I had threatened her with a chemical weapon. I offered to show them the video footage, timestamps, and even the documentation from the construction site that proved everything had occurred on my property. They said they would review it at the next board meeting in a month. A month. It was a setup, a delay tactic, a bureaucratic stall meant to wear me down. But what Karen didn't know was that while she was hiding behind HOA paperwork, I had already gone to work. I started with public records, digging into HOA bylaws, and even visiting the county clerk's office. Not out of obsession, but because I knew the only way to beat her was by playing her game better than she could. And deep in Section 4.2b of the HOA regulations, I found it. The golden rule: any homeowner caught trespassing on another resident's property without permission, particularly for the use of private utilities, would be subject to immediate investigation, fines, and potential removal of HOA privileges. That was it. That was my nuke. I printed every video frame of her on my lawn, every water bill, every time-stamped photo. I compiled it into a thick packet, highlighted the bylaw in neon yellow, and made copies. One went to the kitchen Tahoe. The rest went to a few neighbors who I knew had also suffered under Karen's reign. I didn't start a war. I lit a fuse. Within 2 days, neighbors began knocking on my door. Glenn, 2 houses down, said she once reported his hammock for being too colorful. Another neighbor shared that she got fined after Karen complained about her Halloween decorations being too scary. The stories poured out, and with each one, the tide turned. Karen had made enemies everywhere. All I had to do was connect the dots. Then came the final blow. Someone leaked a recording of a private HOA meeting where Karen tried to manipulate the board. Her voice was unmistakable, entitled, shrill, accusing everyone of ganging up on her. The audio went viral in our community forum and hit harder when paired with the sewage sprinkler video, now edited with dramatic music and slow-motion zooms of her reaction. 2 days later, she came outside for the first time, sunglasses on, no makeup, and visibly shaken. She didn't yell. She didn't touch the hose. She got into her car and drove away. For the first time since she moved in, the street felt calm. No one pretended anymore. Neighbors smiled. People walked their dogs without being scrutinized. But I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Because people like Karen don't admit defeat. They play the long game. Sure enough, on the third day of peace, there was a knock at my door. Karen was back, flanked by 2 HOA board members. One held a clipboard, the other a thick folder. Karen stood there like she was the lead in a courtroom drama, arms folded, jaw clenched and eyes locked on mine. The clipboard guy said they were there to address an escalating property dispute and potential biohazard incident. I offered to let them in. Karen snapped that she didn't feel safe entering my home. I smiled politely and stepped outside instead. They handed me a formal complaint, 3 pages long, packed with exaggerated language. Karen accused me of orchestrating a campaign of public humiliation, using surveillance to intimidate her, and unleashing what she described as a chemical attack on her lawn. She even claimed the emotional trauma was ongoing and requested that I pay for professional cleanup and issue a formal apology. I said nothing. I just turned around, walked inside, and returned with my own folder, one filled with evidence, the videos, the timestamps, the HOA bylaws she violated, the water bills, the screenshots from neighborhood forums, a list of other neighbors who had submitted complaints about her. I handed it to the board, and for the first time, Karen's face changed. She watched them flip through the packet in silence, her confidence starting to crack. One of the board members leaned over to whisper something to the other. Karen tried to interrupt, claiming I had manipulated the footage, that I was stalking her, that I had turned the entire neighborhood against her, but no one was listening. The board said they needed to review everything and would call a special meeting within the week. Karen protested, demanded immediate action, but they ignored her. As they left, she turned to me one last time, her voice low, sharp, and shaking. She said, "Everyone's going to know what kind of person you really are." I smiled and replied, "They already do." That night I posted a fact-based summary of everything in the community forum. No sarcasm, no embellishment, just the truth. The response was overwhelming. Neighbors backed me up. People shared their own Karen horror stories. Someone dropped off a pie on my porch with a sticky note that read, "You're a legend." And for the first time in weeks, I slept without checking my cameras every hour. But I wasn't naive. I knew the fight wasn't completely over. Karen had one last move, and she was going to play it. I just didn't know when. The special HOA meeting happened 3 days later behind closed doors, but word traveled fast. Karen showed up with a thick folder filled with documents she claimed were legal threats, emotional evaluations, and environmental reports. She demanded that I be fined, forced to remove my cameras, and publicly reprimanded. But it all crumbled under the weight of the truth. The board reviewed my footage, reviewed the bylaw she had clearly violated, and issued an official HOA warning to her. She was fined $500 for multiple counts of trespassing and unauthorized use of private utilities. They warned that any further incidents would result in suspension of her HOA privileges. No apology was given to me, but I could see it in their faces. They knew they had backed the wrong person for too long. Karen didn't say a word when the meeting ended. She walked out with her sunglasses on and her jaw clenched, but the air around her was different. Something had cracked. Her fan club disappeared overnight. The board member who had supported her resigned quietly the next week. Neighbors who used to nod politely now crossed the street to avoid her. Her driveway stayed dry, her porch stayed dirty, and the hose, she never touched it again. But just when I thought it was finally over, she tried one last move. She filed a complaint with the city, said I had illegally connected a sewage line to my home, that I was creating a biohazard. A city inspector came by 2 days later, clipboard in hand, looking half amused before he even knocked. He checked everything. I walked him through the entire system, showed him the temporary setup, the disconnection from the tank, the fact that the hose was back to its normal use. He laughed. Not a small laugh, either. He said, off the record, "This is the most creative revenge I have ever seen." Then added, "If more people protected their property like this, I might be out of a job." He left, no violations filed. I offered him a bottle of water. He declined, smiling, "Only if it's not from that hose." At that point, the video had surpassed 4 million views online. I was getting messages from strangers around the country. Someone made a remix of Karen's Scream with EDM music. Another person created a graphic novel-style animation of the entire sewage sprinkler scene. My story had become the rallying cry of suburban justice. I even got an email from a guy named Devin who lived across town. Apparently Karen had moved. sold her house quietly, and vanished only to reappear in his HOA. He had seen the video, recognized her immediately, and it didn't take long before she started pulling the same stunts there, complaining about decorations, harassing the mailman, and, yes, dragging someone else's hose across the lawn like it was her own. Leblon asked for advice. I sent him everything: the valve system diagram, the camera placement, even a document titled Karen Defense Protocol. He responded with 3 words: "This means war." A week later, he sent me footage. Karen, sprayed again, this time with a mixture of compost tea and expired fertilizer. Completely natural, absolutely vile, and right in front of a group of scooter-riding kids who burst into laughter. Karen slipped, fell into her rose bushes, and screamed loud enough to summon every neighbor on the block. The video was not as clean as mine, but it had heart and chaos. It went viral. Again. That was when it hit me. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was a traveling circus of entitlement, a roaming tyrant, testing the patience of every HOA she entered. But now, thanks to the internet, every time she struck, someone was ready to strike back. That gave me an idea. I launched a small blog, part humor, part advice, called Hose Justice. I posted ridiculous HOA stories, anonymous submissions, and tips on how to deal with suburban nightmares. I uploaded edited versions of the videos as a mini web series. People loved it. Someone even made t-shirts with slogans like "Hose before bros" and "I dare you" printed across the chest. But my favorite moment wasn't online. It happened one quiet Sunday afternoon. I was in my backyard trimming the hedges when I heard laughter. Not Karen's fake politeness or HOA chit-chat. Real laughter, loud and unfiltered. I peeked over and saw the new couple who had moved into Karen's old house. They were chasing their toddler around a sprinkler they had set up on their lawn, their own hose, their own water. The kids squealed in delight. The parents laughed. And I stood there for a second, just taking it in. No more yelling. No more fines, no more stolen utilities, just peace. The hose lay coiled beside me like a retired warrior, finally at rest. I reached down, turned the spigot, and watered my tomato plant. No cameras, no booby traps, no drama, just water, just quiet, just home.